She set the water pitcher down. That was it. That was the moment. Not a gunshot, not a scream, not a door kicked open in the middle of the night. Just a black woman from Richmond, Virginia, setting a water pitcher down on a service station in the most dangerous private dining room in Seoul, and stepping forward. Nobody in that room thought she was about to change everything. She knew she was. Her name was Zaria Monroe, 26 years old, former doctoral candidate in East Asian manuscript authentication at the University of Virginia, current waitress at Changdok, the most exclusive restaurant in Gangnam, where the menu had no prices because the people eating there had never needed to ask. She had been invisible in this building for 14 months. Efficient, precise, unnoticed. That was the job. That was survival. Tonight, survival required something else. The private dining room at Changdok held 11 people that Thursday at 9:47 p.m. 8 of them had law degrees. One of them was Kang Ji Han, the most feared and least visible power broker in South Korea, a man whose name moved money and silence in equal measure. One of them was Park Sung-jae, a celebrated document broker who had flown in from Tokyo that morning with a leather case handcuffed to his wrist and a commission that would set him up for the rest of his life. And one of them was Zaria Monroe, who was counting the minutes until her shift ended so she could call her mother before the time difference made it too late. The room smelled like cedarwood and aged whiskey and the specific kind of tension that only exists when everyone present has something enormous to lose. Park Sung-jae laid 3 documents on the white linen table with the careful reverence of a man who understood what they represented. Joseon-era land grants. 3 centuries old, allegedly recovered from a private archive in Busan. $200 million worth of ancestral estate claims belonging to the Kang family. Legacy, legitimacy, and history all pressed between conservation paper and sealed with the weight of a dynasty. The lawyers leaned in. The historians adjusted their glasses. Kang Ji Han sat at the head of the table and looked at the documents the way he looked at everything, like he was already 3 moves ahead and simply waiting for the board to catch up. Zaria moved around the table. She was behind Park Sung-jae when she saw it. Not the whole document. One specific element on the 3rd grant, the authenticating clerk's counter seal in the lower left corner, a brushstroke detail so small that the naked eye would register nothing wrong, would pass right over it, would see what it expected to see because everything else was perfect. The paper was period correct, the ink oxidation was masterful, the official seal was flawless, but the counter seal brushstroke ran right to left. Zaria's breath caught so quietly that no one heard it. She knew this detail because of a footnote, her own footnote, buried in a paper she'd written during her 2nd year at UVA, a paper about Joseon administrative reforms and the standardization of bureaucratic seal conventions across different provincial offices. Dr. Elaine Choi, her advisor, had circled that footnote in red ink and written in the margin, "This is the whole argument, Zaria. Don't bury it." The right-to-left brushstroke convention wasn't standardized in Joseon documentation until 1764. The date on this document was 1753. Whoever forged it knew everything. The materials, the aging process, the official protocol. They had done extraordinary work, and they had gotten one footnote wrong. Zaria stood there with a water pitcher in her hand and felt the full weight of what was in front of her settle like cold water across her shoulders. She had 2 options. She could keep moving, finish the table, clock out, call her mother, pretend she had seen nothing, which was, after all, what she was paid to do. Or she could speak. The pause lasted 4 seconds. She would remember those 4 seconds for the rest of her life. She set the water pitcher down. She stepped forward and said, in Korean, accented, imperfect but precise, There is a problem with the third document. The room went the kind of still that precedes eruption. Park Sung-jae turned slowly. He looked at her with the expression of a man encountering an inconvenience he hadn't budgeted for. Dismissive, slightly amused, the way powerful men look at things they've already decided don't matter. "Excuse me." His Korean was smooth and practiced. "The counter seal on the third grant," Zaria said. "The brushstroke orientation, right to left. That convention wasn't standardized in Joseon provincial documentation until the administrative reform of 1764. She kept her voice flat, measured, the way Dr. Choi had taught her to present findings, not as an opinion, but as a fact waiting to be confirmed. This document is dated 1753. Whoever authenticated it missed an 11-year gap. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Park Sung-jae's amusement evaporated. He looked at the document, then back at her. "You're a waitress." "I'm also the person who just told you the document is forged," she said. "You can address whichever one you'd like." Someone at the table made a sound, half suppressed, half genuine. Zaria didn't look to see who. Kang Ji Han had not moved, had not changed expression. But he was looking at Zaria Monroe directly, and she realized with a jolt that in 14 months of serving his table, refilling his water glass, existing in his peripheral vision, he had never once looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. He said one word to the senior historian seated to his left. "Check." The historian pulled a reference text from his briefcase, the kind of man who brought reference texts to dinner because he had learned that powerful men required answers immediately. He checked. His face did the thing faces do when the ground shifts without warning. He looked at Ji Han, gave the smallest nod. Park Sung-jae was escorted from the building within 4 minutes. Not violently, not loudly, just finally. The room waited. Ji Han looked at Zaria. "Sit down." She sat. Her hands were completely steady, and she didn't know why. Maybe because she had already done the terrifying thing, and everything that came after it was simply consequence. He asked her 3 questions, not about the document, about her, where she had studied, who had taught her, why she was in Seoul. She answered all 3 without softening any of it. UVA doctoral program. Dr. Elaine Choi. Her mother had cancer, and the stipend didn't cover the bills, and Seoul paid better than anything she could find in Richmond, Virginia. Ji Han listened to every word with the focused attention of a man who did not waste it. Then he thanked her, told her she would be compensated for the interruption, and excused her. She picked up the water pitcher, finished her shift, took the subway home. But something in that room had permanently changed, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said so, because that was exactly the kind of people they were. If you are already hooked, drop a comment right now. Tell me, would you have spoken up in that room? Would you have set that water pitcher down, knowing what it might cost you? Because what Zaria does next is going to divide this entire comment section. I promise you that. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. Or rather, nothing that was supposed to look like something happened. Zaria worked her shifts, ate convenience store ramen at midnight and told herself it was temporary. Called her mother every evening before the time difference made conversation impossible. Linda Monroe sounded tired in the way that had become her new baseline. A tiredness that lived beneath the surface of her laugh, that Zaria had learned to hear and never acknowledged directly, because acknowledging it made it more real. "Seoul treating you well, baby?" Linda asked on the second night. "Seoul is Seoul," Zaria said. "How's Dr. Reeves?" "Optimistic," which either means things are improving or he gets paid to be optimistic. "Hard to tell." Zaria smiled into the phone. "Get some sleep, Mom. Call me tomorrow. Every day." What Zaria didn't know, what she wouldn't know for another week, was that the morning after the dining room incident, Kang Ji Han had quietly contacted Professor Woo Jae-min, one of South Korea's most respected manuscript historians, and asked him to assess the Third Land Grant independently. No mention of Zaria, no reference to her findings, just the document and a request for a confidential assessment. Woo Jae-min reached the same conclusion. Different methodology, identical destination. Ji Han read the professor's report alone, in his office overlooking the Han River at dawn. He sat with a stillness that wasn't peace. It was the stillness of a man recalibrating in the wake of information that shifted everything beneath his feet. If the forgery was confirmed from the inside, someone in his most trusted circle had arranged it. This wasn't a failed deal. It wasn't incompetence. It was a declaration of war. He thought about the woman who had caught it, the American who had stood in his dining room with a water pitcher and hadn't flinched. He sat with that thought longer than was strictly necessary. What he did not permit himself to examine, not yet, not in the pale dawn with a report in his hands and a betrayal to process, was why he kept returning to the image of her. Why the memory of the way she had held Park Sung-jae's gaze without blinking sat somewhere in his chest, like a question he hadn't asked himself yet. He knew why. He simply wasn't ready to know it. Kang Ji Han had not been ready to know something like this for 11 years, not since the night he stood at his father's grave and made himself a promise he had kept without exception. His mother had been murdered. His little sister, 8 years old, still missing her 2 front teeth, had been taken in the same act of violence, a message sent by men who had since been erased from the earth. His father, Kang Sung-woo, the most formidable man Ji Han had ever known, a man who had built a dynasty from nothing and commanded rooms with his silence alone, had simply stopped. Not dramatically, not loudly. He had sat down one day, and the grief had taken everything that made him the man he was, and 14 months later he was gone. The doctors called it cardiac failure. Ji Han had always understood it as something more specific. His father had loved his family so completely that when the centre of it was destroyed, there was nothing left to sustain him. Ji Han had watched that happen, had carried it, had stood at that second grave in 2 years and decided, with the cold certainty of a 22-year-old who had seen what love cost, that he would build everything his father had built, would protect it better, would carry the legacy forward with both hands and an iron spine, and he would never, for anything, for anyone, give another person the kind of access that had unmade his father. He had kept that promise for 11 years without it costing him anything he couldn't manage until that night. On day 3, one of his junior associates appeared at Changdok and informed Zaria, with careful politeness, that Mr. Kang would like her to review 2 additional documents at her earliest convenience. She said she would come after her shift. The second meeting was different. Smaller room. No lawyers, no historians, no audience. Just Ji Han, Zaria, and 2 documents laid on a table between them like questions waiting to be answered. He didn't explain why he'd called her specifically. She didn't ask. She simply examined the documents with the same methodical attention she'd used in the dining room, checking paper composition, ink layering, seal orientation, brushstroke conventions. When she finished, she looked up. "The first one is authentic," she said. "The second one isn't. The aging compound on the seal is synthetic. There's a specific oxidation pattern that only appears when the process is accelerated chemically, rather than through actual time." Ji Han had been watching her work rather than watching the documents. She noticed this but didn't comment. "You almost didn't speak," he said. "In the dining room?" She looked up. "Yes." "What stopped you from staying quiet?" Zaria thought about her mother's voice on the phone. about Dr. Choi's red ink circling a footnote she'd almost deleted, about 14 months of being the most educated person in a room where no one thought to ask her anything. The dining room was the first time silence had a price I couldn't pay, she said. Something shifted in Ji Han's expression, barely perceptible. Come back tomorrow, he said. For what? There are more documents. She held his gaze for a moment and left. She came back the next day, and the day after that. On the third visit he ordered tea. She took hers without sugar. He had observed this without being asked, without remarking on it, and when the tray arrived he poured her cup first. It was such a small thing, so automatic it might have meant nothing, except that his hands paused for a fraction of a second afterward, as though the gesture had surprised him, and he didn't look at her, and she didn't look at him, and neither of them said a single word about it. She thought about that fraction of a second on the subway home, filed it in the place where she kept things she wasn't ready to address. That place was getting crowded. Now let me tell you about the man who built the trap, because every forgery has an architect, and this one had a face that smiled at you while it constructed your destruction. Kang Seo-jun arrived at Changdeok on a Wednesday afternoon, Ji Han's cousin, chief legal counsel, the legal mind behind every legitimate structure that held Ji Han's empire upright. He was charming in the specific way that only the most intelligent people are charming, with complete awareness of the effect. He introduced himself to Zaria with warmth, thanked her genuinely for catching the forgery, asked thoughtful questions about her academic background with the curiosity of a man who respected scholarship. He was impressive. Zaria was polite. When he left, she stood at the service station and felt an unease she didn't immediately have language for. Something in the way he had asked about the specific detail she'd caught. The angle, the precise element, the exact nature of her expertise, had been a fraction too exact for casual curiosity. He wasn't asking because he was impressed. He was asking because he needed to understand the size of the problem she represented. She filed it, said nothing. Not yet. What she didn't know was the architecture beneath the surface. Seo-jun had spent 20 years building Ji Han's empire. The contracts, the heritage claims, the authentication frameworks that had transformed a dangerous man into a legitimate one. He had watched Ji Han inherit a name, a seat, a dynasty, by virtue of birth order alone, by being the son instead of the nephew. Seo-jun had given Ji Han every legal instrument he needed to carry the Kang family legacy forward, had designed the entire structure from the foundation up, and had received in return the title of essential. Never primary, never first, never the name above the door. He had told himself for 20 years that it was enough. One morning he looked in the mirror and understood, with perfect clarity, that it was not. The Joseon land grants were the final piece of a plan 3 years in the making. If the forged documents authenticated successfully, the $200 million estate claim would consolidate Ji Han's position so completely that Seo-jun's resulting exposure of the forgery, timed precisely through the right channels, would destroy Ji Han's credibility, trigger a succession crisis, and leave only one steady hand to navigate the collapse. His own. Zaria Monroe was never supposed to exist in that equation. She had arrived at the wrong moment and said the right thing, and now Seo-jun had a problem that charm alone was not going to resolve. Now I need you to stop for a moment and be honest with me in the comments. Seo-jun spent 20 years being essential and invisible. 20 years of building something magnificent for someone else's name. Does that justify what he did? I am not saying it does. I am asking what you think. Because this story is about to show you what 2 decades of invisible resentment looks like when it finally decides to move. Zaria came home on a Friday night after a double shift at 11 p.m. and knew immediately that something was wrong. She stopped in the doorway and stood still. The room was trying to tell her something. Her research notes were gone. 3 weeks of documentation on the document provenance chain. Gone from the desk drawer where she kept them in a manila folder between her lease agreement and her mother's insurance paperwork. Her laptop sat open on the desk, wiped clean. Her external drive was missing. And on the kitchen counter, placed with deliberate precision in the center of the surface, was a photograph. Her mother, Linda Monroe, outside the cancer treatment center in Richmond, Virginia. Recent, Zaria could tell by the coat, the pale blue one her mother had bought in February and immediately called to describe in detail, because she was the kind of woman who called her daughter about coats. The photograph was taken from across the street, long lens. Her mother didn't know anyone was watching. Zaria sat down on the kitchen floor and tried not to cry. She allowed herself exactly 3 minutes. The fear was real, and she gave it its 3 minutes because suppressed fear doesn't disappear. It just moves somewhere harder to find. She sat with it, felt the full weight of it. Her mother's face in a photograph taken by someone who wanted Zaria to understand precisely how far they were willing to go. 3 minutes. Then she got up, changed her clothes, picked up her phone and her keys and walked out of her apartment. She went to Ji Han. She arrived at his building at 12 minutes past midnight. His security stopped her at the door. She held up the photograph and said she needed 5 minutes with Mr. Kang. She got them. The elevator opened into the glass-walled room above Seoul. The city spread below them in every direction, enormous, indifferent, blazing. Ji Han was still in his work clothes. He looked like a man who didn't have a version of this hour that included rest. She sat across from him and placed the photograph on the table without preamble. Whoever arranged the forgery knows I'm a problem now. My research notes are gone. My laptop was wiped. This was on my kitchen counter. She met his eyes steadily. Ji Han looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Long enough that Zaria began to understand she was watching a man decide something, not hesitate about something. Those were not the same. He picked up his phone, made one call, in front of her, in Korean she could follow well enough to understand. Private security arranged for a residential address in Richmond, Virginia. Immediate. Continuous. He gave her mother's address from memory, which meant he had already looked into her, which meant he had been paying closer attention than she realized, which should have unsettled her, and instead made her feel something she was not prepared to examine. He set the phone down, did not look to her for gratitude. Why? She asked anyway. He looked up. Because you came here instead of running. That tells me something. What does it tell you? That you intend to finish what you started. A pause. I find that valuable. It was not a declaration. It was something more honest than one. An acknowledgement from a man who didn't offer them without full weight behind every word. Zaria understood this. She nodded once. What does it tell you? That you intend to finish what you started. A pause. I find that valuable. It was not a declaration. It was something more honest than one. An acknowledgement from a man who didn't offer them without full weight behind every word. Zaria understood this. She nodded once. But she didn't leave immediately. And he didn't ask her to. But she didn't leave immediately. And he didn't ask her to. They sat in that room above Seoul for another hour. They talked about the documents, the provenance chain, the specific gap in the forgery's logic she'd been tracing before her notes were taken. It was a working conversation, precise, focused, purposeful. It was also, unmistakably, something else. The kind of something else that neither of them named because naming it would have required acknowledging that somewhere between the dining room and midnight and a photograph of her mother, the distance between them had become something neither of them had planned for. He refilled her water glass at some point, automatically, the way she had done for him 100 times, and the reversal landed so unexpectedly that she almost laughed. She didn't, but almost. And he caught it. That near laugh, that fraction of warmth she hadn't quite managed to contain. His eyes moved to her face and held for 1 second longer than the conversation required. In that second, something passed between them that both of them would carry home and pretend they hadn't felt. When she finally stood to leave, he walked with her to the elevator. 3 seconds while the doors opened, close enough that she was aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with danger. "Be careful," he said. "Always," she said. The doors closed. She exhaled slowly in the empty elevator and told herself firmly that she had much more urgent things to think about. She was right. She was also not entirely convincing. Seo Jun was not a man who repeated his mistakes. When the photograph didn't work, when Zaria moved closer to Ji Han instead of disappearing, he shifted approaches entirely. He filed an anonymous report with the Korean Cultural Heritage Authority claiming Zaria Monroe had been operating as an unlicensed document authenticator and may have been involved in the original forgery scheme. Suddenly she was the suspect. Suddenly her visa status was flagged. Suddenly there was a version of this story where she was the villain. Ji Han called her at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. 4 words. "Don't go to work." The silence on the line was its own answer. "I need 48 hours, she said. "You have them. I'll need access to your archive contacts, and I need to make 1 phone call to the United States. Done." She hung up and opened her laptop, new, secured, and started doing the only thing she actually knew how to do. She went to work. This is the sequence that defines Zaria Monroe more completely than anything else in this story. Because when everything around her accelerated, when the threat became official and the walls started closing in, she didn't reach for anything except her methodology. Trace the forgery's provenance chain, the way you trace a manuscript's ownership history. Archive by archive, contact by contact. Find the thread and follow it all the way back to where it began. She found the forger through a material anachronism. The synthetic oxidation compound used on the seal had a specific signature she recognized from a fraudulent Ming Dynasty case she'd studied at UVA. A case Dr. Choi had used in class, precisely because the forger had been so technically brilliant and had still made 1 identifiable error. The compound left a residue pattern at the molecular level that no surface work could conceal. And there was only 1 conservator in South Korea known to use this particular formulation. A man named Baek, who operated a private restoration studio in Incheon, and who had, Zaria discovered through 3 hours of cross-referencing, been contracted by Kang Seo-jun's legal firm for document restoration work 18 months ago. She called Dr. Choi. The phone rang twice. "Zaria." Her professor's voice was exactly as she remembered. Direct, warm, carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years being right in rooms full of people who doubted her. "Dr. Choi, I need help." "I know. I've been waiting for you to call." A pause. "Are you safe?" "I'm working," Zaria said. "Which is the same thing." Dr. Choi gave a short sound that was almost a laugh. "Tell me what you need." Zaria told her everything. When she finished, Dr. Choi said, "I can corroborate the compound identification through the UVA Materials Science Lab. Signed academic attestation within 24 hours. That will hold anywhere." A beat. "Zaria, I need to say something." "Okay. I should have fought harder to keep you in the program. When you withdrew, I let you go because I told myself I was respecting your decision. I think I was also afraid of the conversation." Her voice was steady but carrying something underneath it. "You were the best student I ever had. That footnote you almost cut, I still use that paper in my seminar every year." Zaria sat very still. Outside her window, Seoul moved through its ordinary Tuesday completely unaware of her. "You circled it," Zaria said finally. "In red ink." "Yes. I almost deleted it." "I know. Don't ever do that again." Zaria closed her eyes for 1 second. "Thank you, Dr. Choi." "Finish it," her professor said. "Then come home and finish the dissertation. You can do both." She assembled everything over 36 hours. Every thread, every connection, every piece of documentation linking the forged land grants through Bayek's studio to Seo Jun's legal firm. A paper trail, thin in places, but unbroken all the way through. She organized it the way she organized her academic work, methodically, cross-referenced, annotated. She called her mother before delivering it. "You sound like something's happening," Linda said immediately. "Something's happening." "Good something, or I'm not sure yet. Good eventually, I think." Her mother was quiet. "You following the thread? All the way to the end. Then you're fine. Simple. Certain. The security men are very polite, by the way. Whoever sent them has good manners. I'll tell him you said so." A pause. She heard it. Knew her mother heard it too. The particular weight of him in a sentence where he hadn't been before. "Baby," Linda said. "Mum, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying it's okay. To let something be good." Zaria pressed her fingers against her eyes. "Get some rest. Call me tomorrow. Every day." She arrived at Ji Han's building with a bound document 43 pages long and a flash drive. The glass-walled room. Same chairs. Same city below. Smaller in daylight. Stripped of its nighttime grandeur and somehow more honest. She walked him through every page. He read faster than she spoke. When she finished, he set it down. "This is enough," he said. "I know," she said. He looked up at her. And there it was again. That expression she had catalogued so carefully. Something unguarded. Something that didn't belong to the version of him that controlled rooms and moved empires and never let anything show. "You could have stopped," he said. "The dining room was enough. This," he touched the edge of the document, "you didn't have to." "The dining room was the truth," she said. "This is the proof. They are not the same thing." He was still for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "They're not." The way he said it, she understood it wasn't only about the documents. She understood it and didn't look away from it, and neither did he. And the city below was vast and entirely irrelevant. What happened next, Zaria was not in the room for. Ji Han met with Seo Jun alone. Seo Jun walked in and found the 43 pages on the table between them. He looked at it for a long moment. Ji Han gave him one opportunity. Seo Jun did not apologize. He explained. 20 years of being the second name on every document that built an empire his legal mind had designed. 20 years of watching Ji Han receive the weight of a legacy Seo Jun had made possible, made legitimate, made permanent. Ji Han listened to every word. Then, "You built the structure. I've always known that. I never said it enough. That's on me." A pause. "But you built it for the legacy. Then you tried to destroy it. You don't get to be angry that I can't forgive both things at once." He placed one final document on the table. An amended succession filing Seo Jun had registered 3 months ago, positioning himself to inherit control in the event of Ji Han's discreditation. "You were always going to do this," Ji Han said. "The forgery just gave you the timeline." Seo Jun said nothing. He was handed to the authorities through channels Ji Han controlled. Clean, permanent. But Seo Jun was not finished. Because Seo Jun, sitting in a holding facility with the full understanding that he was going to prison, had one move left. One that didn't require access or money. Only a phone call through a contact so buried that Ji Han had not yet found it. The instruction was simple. Eliminate Zaria Monroe, the woman who had pulled the thread that unravelled everything. If Seo Jun could not have the legacy, he would destroy the thing that was quietly, dangerously, becoming the reason Ji Han was starting to want something beyond it. Ji Han found out about the contract 37 minutes after it was placed. He was moving before the information finished reaching him. Zaria was walking back from a late archive review in central Seoul, a route she had taken 3 times that week, 3 times too many, a mistake she would have corrected if she'd had one more day. The street was quiet, the particular quiet of a city at 10 p.m. between its crowds. She had her coat pulled close, and her mind already composing the final section of her documentation. She heard the footsteps when they were already too close. She was already turning, already calculating, when the world went sideways. Ji Han arrived 60 seconds later. He would measure that minute for a long time. 60 seconds between the information reaching him and his car reaching that street and him moving. Actually running. Crossing the pavement with the kind of focus that strips everything else away. Toward the sound of the confrontation. 1 minute too late to prevent it. Just in time to stop it from being worse. Zaria was on the ground, conscious. She had fought back. The evidence was on the man Ji Han's security reached first, and Zaria Monroe, even hurt and on the pavement, had not gone quietly. But she was injured. The kind of injured that required more than she could give it on a sidewalk. Ji Han knelt beside her, and the city contracted to only this. He had spent 11 years building his life, so this would not be possible. 11 years of deliberate distance and controlled exposure and walls that held because he had maintained them with both hands. He had watched love take his father one piece at a time, and had told himself, with every certainty a grieving 22-year-old could possess, that he would not hand anyone the power to do the same to him. "I'm fine," Zaria said. Her voice was steady. Even now. That steadiness, that absolute refusal to be anything less than present, whatever the circumstances. "You're not fine," he said. "I'm conscious and talking to you," she said. "In my experience, that qualifies." "Zaria." She looked at him. Whatever she saw in his face made her stop arguing, which told him everything about what his face was doing, because Zaria Monroe did not stop arguing for anything small. And then she closed her eyes. The hospital was 15 minutes of the longest silence of his life. He sat in that waiting room and did not move for 3 hours. His security cycled through with updates. He did not call Linda Monroe. He picked up the phone twice, had her number dialed, put it down both times. He told himself he didn't have enough information yet. Beneath that logic, he knew the truth, the image of Linda Monroe's voice breaking with fear on a phone in Richmond, Virginia, was something he could not hold right now on top of everything else he was holding. He would call her when he had something better than uncertainty to give her. He sat with that, with the weight of the waiting room and the antiseptic air, and the fact that 60 seconds had been the entire distance between Zaria Monroe existing and not existing. When the doctor came out, Ji Han was standing before the man finished his first sentence. She was awake. He walked into that hospital room and stopped in the doorway for 2 seconds. Long enough to see her, to confirm that she was real and present and breathing, and to feel with complete clarity what 3 hours of uncertainty had actually cost him. What it had revealed about a promise he had kept for 11 years and was, he now understood, no longer keeping. Zaria looked at him from the hospital bed with dark eyes that were tired and clear and entirely direct. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her. He did not trust himself to speak first. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to read what was in his face. "Ji Han," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not going to leave you," she said. She said it directly. No softening, no strategic ambiguity, no half measure. She looked at him while she said it, so he would understand she meant it exactly the way it sounded. Not as comfort, not as reassurance, but as a statement of fact. And Kang Ji Han, who had spent 11 years keeping his promise with both hands, who had watched love dismantle his father and decided with the certainty of grief that he would never be that exposed, never be that vulnerable, never hand anyone that kind of access, sat in a plastic chair in a hospital room and felt something break open in his chest that he had kept shut for so long, he had stopped remembering what it felt like before it was locked. He reached out and took her hand. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. She knew him well enough by then to understand that the gesture carried everything he wasn't yet able to say out loud, that it was more honest than any declaration he had ever made, because it was not managed, it was simply true. They stayed like that while Seoul went about its enormous, indifferent, ordinary life outside the window. If you are still here, and I know you are, I need you to do something right now before this story ends, like this video. Not for the algorithm, though that matters more than you know. Like it because Zaria Monroe walked into an impossible room and refused to be silent and paid a price for it, and got back up every single time. Like it because Ji Han Kang sat in a waiting room for 3 hours and felt 11 years of walls come down, and did not run from what was on the other side. Like it because some love stories don't begin with a grand gesture. They begin with a water pitcher, a footnote, and 2 people who are both too honest to pretend they feel nothing. Drop a comment right now and tell me, was the moment he took her hand the most devastating thing in this entire story? Or was it something else? I want to know. I read every single one. Seo Jun went to trial. The case was thorough. The evidence unimpeachable, the verdict final. He was sentenced with the kind of permanence that closes a chapter completely. He did not look at Ji Han during the sentencing. Ji Han sat at the back of the courtroom and watched it conclude with the stillness of a man who was not satisfied exactly. Satisfaction was too simple a word for something this layered, but who was resolved? The Kang family legacy was intact. His mother and his sister and his father had not died for nothing. The name they had carried would continue, legitimately, permanently, without the rot Seo Jun had tried to build into its foundation. The anonymous filing against Zaria was withdrawn within hours of the arrest. Her documentation, submitted through Dr. Choi's academic network and Ji Han's legal team simultaneously, triggered a formal review of the Busan archive collection that revealed 2 additional forged documents circulating in the Korean cultural heritage market. Within a week, it was national news. The forgery ring was finished. Zaria's name was not in any of the reporting. She had asked for that. Some truths, she had decided, don't require your name attached to prove they belong to you. The independent authentication of the Joseon land grants was completed using historical records she helped locate through Dr. Choi's network. Actual records from actual archives documenting 3 centuries of Kang family land ownership with the kind of specificity no court in South Korea could challenge. The $200 million estate claim resolved legitimately. The legacy was preserved, not through power, through proof. Through a footnote a girl from Richmond, Virginia, had almost deleted. Ji Han offered Zaria the role 3 days after it was over. Not at a formal meeting, at the end of a conversation about the archive records that had kept going longer than either of them planned, the way their conversations always did now. I want to create a foundation, he said. Cultural authenticity. Protecting historical documents from fraudulent reclamation claims. It is a growing problem across East Asia, and no one is addressing it with serious academic rigor. He looked at her steadily. I want you to lead it. Full resources, complete autonomy. Your methodology, your network, your decisions. Zaria was quiet for a moment. I have a condition. Name it. The foundation carries my mother's name. She held his gaze without blinking. The Linda Monroe Foundation, for the preservation of historical truth. Something moved across his face, warm and completely unhidden, as though he had simply decided to stop managing it. Yes, I would have agreed to any condition you named. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. That's why I only asked for one. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel right now, because this is what we do here. We tell stories about people who walk into impossible rooms and refuse to stay silent, who get knocked down and get back up, who find that the thing they were most afraid to want was waiting on the other side of the hardest choice they ever made. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments, what was the moment this story got you? The dining room, the hospital, the assassination? I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next story.